They were just 15 hours away from handing me my 2.4 million pension. 15 hours, instead, at exactly 6:00 p.m. My employee badge chirped, beep, red, access denied. I didn't scream, I didn't cry. I simply went home, opened my laptop, and triggered a sequence of events that would cost the company $1.1 billion in just 3 hours. They thought firing me was the end, but I had been waiting for the perfect moment to start the final chapter they couldn't control. My name is Danielle Hart. I'm 46 years old, and until yesterday, I was the Chief Ethics and Compliance Officer at Barriton Strategic Holdings, a global investment firm headquartered in Port Mercer. For nearly 24 years, I had been the quiet force ensuring our financial empire played by the rules, not always popular, but always necessary. The irony wasn't lost on me. The woman responsible for ensuring ethical compliance was being escorted out of the building like a common thief, exactly 15 hours before her retirement package would have vested. 24 years of service erased with the beep of a security card. "I need your badge, laptop, and phone," said Marcus from security. Avoiding eye contact, I'd known Marcus for 12 years. His daughter had interned in my department 2 summers ago. Now he couldn't even look at me. "May I ask why?" My voice remained steady, betraying none of the earthquake happening inside me. "HR will contact you with details." His rehearsed response told me everything. This wasn't a spontaneous decision. This was calculated, premeditated. I handed over my company possessions with dignity, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing me break. As I was escorted through the marble lobby that had been my second home for over 2 decades, I noticed Alina, one of my junior analysts, watching from the mezzanine. Her eyes were wide with shock. I gave her a small nod. "Remember what I taught you," I thought. The glass doors shut behind me with a pneumatic hiss of finality. 24 years, gone. It was a perfect autumn evening in Port Mercer, the kind where the setting sun gilds everything in warm light, making even the steel and glass financial district look almost human. But I felt nothing of the beauty as I walked to the parking garage. Only when I was safely inside my car did I allow myself to think about what had just happened. This wasn't a normal termination. This was surgical precision. 6:00 p.m. exactly. On the day before my retirement package worth $2.4 million would have vested at 9:00 a.m. tomorrow morning. I knew exactly who was behind this. Bryce Langford, our new CEO, brought in 18 months ago to modernize Barriton and fast-track us to IPO. The man who called ethics speed bumps on the highway to profit. My phone pinged with an email, my personal email, not my now deactivated work account. The subject line, Termination and Confidentiality Agreement. I skimmed the document, my breath catching at paragraph 7. In exchange for a severance package of 6 months' salary, employee agrees to waive all claims to retirement benefits and pensions that have not yet vested, and further agrees not to disclose any information regarding Barriton Strategic Holdings business practices, client information, or the circumstances of employee's departure to any third party, including but not limited to regulatory agencies. They weren't just firing me, they were trying to silence me. As I drove home through the familiar streets of Port Mercer, my mind raced through the warning signs I'd been ignoring for months. The gradual restriction of my department's oversight, the exclusion from key meetings, the new financial reporting structure that bypassed my team entirely. I had been naive. I had believed in the institution more than the individuals running it, a mistake I wouldn't make again. My house was dark when I arrived home. I lived alone, no husband, no children. My career had been my life. That thought should have devastated me now. But instead, it felt liberating. I had nothing to lose. And when you have nothing to lose, you become very dangerous to those who have taken everything from you. I unlocked my front door, stepping into the quiet darkness of my living room. Without turning on the lights, I went straight to my home office and opened my wall safe. Inside were 2 external hard drives, my insurance policy. For the past 2 years, As I'd watched Bryce Langford transform our company culture from careful stewardship to reckless growth, I had been documenting everything, every email, every altered report, every suspicious transaction, every time my concerns were dismissed or my access was restricted. I hadn't done this out of paranoia. I'd done it out of duty, because somewhere along the way, I realized that Baraton was changing into something I didn't recognize, something that needed to be held accountable. I connected the drives to my personal laptop and began organizing the data. The story it told was clear under Bryce's leadership. Baraton had been systematically misrepresenting its financial health, inflating asset valuations, and concealing liabilities to make the company more attractive for the upcoming IPO. My termination made perfect sense now. The company was weeks away from filing with the SEC. I was the last internal obstacle who might have flagged these issues during the disclosure process. At 9:18 p.m., I submitted my whistleblower report to the Securities and Exchange Commission through their online portal. I attached the most damning evidence, doctored financial statements, emails discussing how to massage the numbers, and records of suspicious transactions with shell companies in tax havens. I also included documentation of my sudden termination. Exactly 15 hours before my pension would have vested a clear case of retaliatory action against a potential whistleblower. Then I did something that would prove particularly devastating to Baraton. I emailed copies of certain key documents to 5 specific clients, massive institutional investors who had billions with us, and who had repeatedly emphasized their zero-tolerance policy for ethical breaches. Finally, I drafted emails to 3 financial journalists I had maintained professional relationships with over the years. I didn't send these yet. Those were my nuclear option. By midnight, I had done everything I could. The machinery was in motion. I took a sleeping pill and went to bed, knowing that tomorrow would change everything. I slept surprisingly well for someone who had just blown up their entire career, perhaps because for the first time in years, I felt clean. My alarm woke me at 6:30 a.m. I made coffee and sat at my kitchen table, opening my laptop to watch the chaos unfold. At 7:45 a.m., the first signs appeared. A former colleague texted me, "Systems are down. Reports won't finalize. What the hell is happening?" I smiled. In their haste to remove me, they had forgotten about the approval protocols I had implemented years ago. Certain critical financial reports required my electronic signature before submission. With my access revoked and no one reassigned to my approval authority, the system was locked. At 8:30 a.m., Baraton's stock opened normally. The day's drama hadn't yet begun. At 8:45 a.m., my phone rang. Unknown number. Danielle Hart. My voice was calm. "Danielle, it's Bryce. There seems to have been a misunderstanding." I said nothing, letting the silence stretch uncomfortably. "Your termination wasn't approved by me personally," he continued, his voice tight with controlled panic. "It was an HR error. We'd like you to come in so we can sort this out." "I'm not available," I replied. "I have a meeting with my attorney at 9:30. "Look, we can make this right. Your retirement package." "My retirement package that vests in 15 minutes, I interrupted. "The one worth $2.4 million that you tried to cheat me out of by firing me 15 hours before it vested, that retirement package." "Danielle, be reasonable." "I've been reasonable for 24 years, Bryce. Now I'm just being legal." I hung up. At 9:00 a.m. EXLU, the SEC issued a press release announcing an investigation into Baraton Strategic Holdings for potential securities fraud. At the same moment, my pension would have vested had I still been employed. At 9:05 a.m., the first of my 5 client contacts called Baraton to announce they were withdrawing their funds, citing fiduciary concerns. At 9:14 a.m., the first news story broke about a whistleblower claim against Baraton. At 9:19 a.m., a financial blog published a story revealing that Bryce Langford had quietly sold a significant portion of his personal Baraton holdings a week earlier. The stock began to plummet. By 9:27 a.m., trading was temporarily halted due to volatility after the stock had fallen 18%. When trading resumed at 9:32 a.m., the sell-off intensified. Institutional investors were dumping their positions, Retail investors were panicking. By 10:00 a.m., Barriton's stock had lost 32% of its value, approximately $1.1 billion in market capitalization, gone in under an hour. At 10:15 a.m., a class action lawsuit was filed by shareholders. At 11:00 a.m., the company's internal messaging system exploded with reports that Bryce Langford had left the building and wasn't responding to calls or texts. The empire was crumbling, and I watched it all happen from my kitchen table, still wearing my pajamas. My phone hadn't stopped ringing. Colleagues, journalists, even board members were trying to reach me. I ignored them all. I had said everything I needed to say in my SEC filing. At 2:00 p.m., I finally got dressed and went for a walk by the lake near my house. The autumn leaves crunched under my feet, and for the first time in years, I noticed how beautiful they were. Red and gold and orange, nature's warning colors. The colors that say danger here. Proceed with caution. My phone pinged with an email from the SEC, confirming receipt of my whistleblower report and requesting a formal interview. They also mentioned potential whistleblower rewards, which could range from 10% to 30% of any monetary sanctions collected. Given the scale of Barriton's market manipulation, this could potentially be many millions, far more than the pension I had lost. But money wasn't what this was about. Another email arrived, this one from Alina, my young analyst. They're saying crazy things about you, but I know the truth. You taught me where to draw the line. I'll hold it. I smiled. Perhaps that was my real legacy, not the documents or the reports, or even the corporate takedown, but the people I had mentored, the next generation who might do better. I sat by the lake until sunset, holding the notebook I had carried with me for 24 years at Barriton. Filled with meeting notes and project plans and ethical guidelines I had once believed the company valued. They thought they could erase me from the record, I whispered to the darkening water. But I left my mark where they can never control it in principle. Tomorrow would bring interviews and depositions and legal battles, but tonight, for the first time in 24 years, I was truly free. The SEC interview room was sterile and windowless, designed to make you forget the passage of time. I had been there for 3 hours already, meticulously walking 2 investigators through the evidence I had gathered. "And you're certain about these transactions through the Cayman Islands subsidiary?" asked Agent Reeves, a stern woman with cropped gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. "Absolutely," I replied, pointing to the spreadsheet. "If you look at the quarterly transfers, they always occur 3 days before earnings reports. The amounts consistently offset underperforming assets." Her colleague, Agent Morales, nodded. "And the timing of your termination?" 15 hours before my pension vested, I supplied. After 24 years of service with exemplary performance reviews, the only negative feedback in my file appeared in the last 6 months, after I began questioning these exact transactions. "That's convenient timing," Morales remarked dryly. "It wasn't convenience, it was cost saving," I replied. "My pension was worth $2.4 million. They fired me to avoid paying it, but they made a $1.1 billion mistake." Reeves leaned forward. "Ms. Hart, why didn't you come to us sooner? This pattern of behavior didn't develop overnight." It was a fair question, and one I had been asking myself since everything unraveled. I took a moment before answering. "I believed I could fix it from the inside," I admitted. Barriton had been my home for nearly half my life. I thought the institution was fundamentally sound. Even if some individuals were pushing boundaries, I was wrong. "When did you realize you were wrong?" Morales asked. 6 months ago, March 14th. The date was burned into my memory. I was working late, reviewing some anomalous transactions flagged by our monitoring system. Bryce was hosting a dinner for the executive team in our private dining room. I needed his authorization to investigate further, so I went to find him. I paused, remembering the moment with crystal clarity. The door was partially open. I overheard Bryce telling the CFO, "Danielle is the last roadblock before the IPO. She needs to disappear before the SEC filing." I didn't enter. I went back to my office and began backing up everything I could access. The agents exchanged glances. That's when you started collecting evidence, Reeves clarified. No, I shook my head. I'd already been documenting inconsistencies for over a year at that point. But that night, I realized they would eventually force me out, so I became more systematic, more thorough, and I created contingency plans for when the axe fell. Very forward thinking, Morales commented. I'm a compliance officer, I replied simply. Risk management is what I do. The questioning continued for another 2 hours. They were particularly interested in the role of the board of directors, whether they had been complicit or merely negligent in their oversight. I told them what I knew, that some board members had raised concerns that were quickly silenced, while others seemed willfully blind to red flags. One last question. Ms. Hart, Reeves said as we concluded. What do you want out of this? I considered the question carefully. Justice, I finally said. Not just for me, but for every employee who believed in the company's stated values, for every client who trusted us with their money, and for every shareholder who invested in a fiction. I want accountability. Reeves nodded. Well, you've certainly started that process. The whistleblower program entitles you to 10-30% of any monetary penalties we collect. Based on what you've shown us today, that could be substantial. I'm aware, I replied. But that wasn't my motivation. No, Reeves agreed, studying me carefully. I believe that. As I gathered my documents, Morales added, we'll be in touch soon. In the meantime, you might want to retain counsel if you haven't already. Barreton's lawyers will be coming for you. They already are, I confirmed. I received a cease and desist letter this morning, and a notice that they're suing me for breach of confidentiality and theft of proprietary information. Standard intimidation tactics, Reeves said dismissively. Your whistleblower status offers significant protections. I thanked them and left the federal building. Stepping into the bright midday sun, my phone showed 17 missed calls and 32 unread emails. Most were from journalists seeking comment. 2 were from former colleagues expressing solidarity. 1 was from Bryce Langford's personal email, with the subject line, "We can still fix this." I deleted it without reading. My attorney had arranged a secure temporary office where I could work during the coming storm. I headed there now, knowing the next few days would be crucial. Barreton would be marshaling its considerable resources to discredit me and minimize the damage. I needed to stay one step ahead. The temporary office was in a nondescript building on the outskirts of Port Mercer's financial district, close enough to be convenient, far enough to avoid accidental encounters with former colleagues. As I set up my laptop, my phone rang. An unfamiliar number with the Port Mercer area code. Danielle Hart, I answered cautiously. Ms. Hart, this is Eleanor Winters. I'm the chairperson of Barreton's board of directors. I straightened in my chair. Eleanor Winters was a legend in financial circles, a pioneer who had broken through glass ceilings in the 1980s and accumulated both wealth and power without sacrificing her reputation for integrity. She had joined Barreton's board only 6 months ago, a move that had reassured many about the company's direction despite Bryce's controversial leadership style. Ms. Winters, I acknowledged, keeping my tone neutral. What can I do for you? You can meet with me, she replied directly. In person, no lawyers, off the record, just a conversation. I hesitated. With respect, Ms. Winters, I'm not sure that would be wise under the circumstances. Under the circumstances, she repeated. It might be the wisest thing either of us could do. I'm not calling on behalf of the board or the company. I'm calling because I need to understand what happened, and you're the only one I trust to tell me the truth. Her words surprised me. You don't know me, Ms. Winters. I know your work, she countered. I've reviewed every ethics report you've filed since I joined the board. I've compared your assessments to the official narratives presented to us. The discrepancies are troubling. Now I was truly intrigued. When and where? Today, 4 o'clock, the Artemis Club. The Artemis Club was one of Port Mercer's oldest and most exclusive women's clubs. Founded in the 1920s as a sanctuary for professional women when such things were rare. It maintained a strict policy of confidentiality for all conversations held within its walls. "I'll be there," I agreed. "Thank you," she paused. "And Ms. Hart, come alone." The call ended, leaving me with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. Eleanor Winters had the power to either help legitimize my claims or to destroy what remained of my professional reputation. Meeting her was a risk, but one I felt compelled to take. I spent the next few hours organizing my evidence and preparing for the various legal battles ahead. My attorney had already connected me with a specialized law firm that handled whistleblower cases, and we had a conference call scheduled for later that afternoon. I would have to reschedule. At 3:45 p.m., I arrived at the Artemis Club, a stately brownstone tucked away on a quiet street lined with ancient oak trees. The receptionist, a poised woman in her 60s, greeted me by name without my having to introduce myself. "Ms. Winters is waiting in the blue room," she informed me, gesturing toward a hallway lined with portraits of distinguished women from Port Mercer's history. The blue room was aptly named a serene space decorated in various shades of blue, from the pale ceiling reminiscent of a clear morning sky to the deep navy of the plush carpet. Eleanor Winters sat in a wing chair by the window, a pot of tea and 2 cups arranged on the table before her. She rose as I entered, a tall, elegant woman in her 70s, with silver hair swept into a classic chignon and keen blue eyes that assessed me immediately. "Ms. Hart," she said, extending her hand. "Thank you for coming." "Ms. Winters?" I shook her hand, noting her firm grip. "Please, call me Eleanor, and may I call you Danielle?" I nodded, taking the seat across from her. She poured tea for both of us, her movements precise and deliberate. 24 years at Barrington," she began. "Longer than most marriages these days." "It was," I agreed. "And ended with less ceremony than most divorces," she added, a hint of disapproval in her tone. "Much less," I confirmed, taking a sip of tea. Eleanor studied me over the rim of her cup. "I've spent the last 48 hours reviewing financial records, board minutes, and internal communications. I've spoken to 12 current executives and 5 former ones. I've consulted with 2 independent forensic accountants." She set down her cup with a decisive click. "And I've come to a disturbing conclusion." I waited, saying nothing. "You're right," she stated flatly. "About all of it." Whatever I had expected from this meeting, it wasn't this unambiguous validation. I carefully controlled my expression, but Eleanor caught my surprise nonetheless. "You thought I would defend the company," she surmised. "I thought you would defend the board," I clarified. "Your reputation is now tied to Barrington's." She gave a short, humorless laugh. "My reputation was built long before Barrington, and it was built on recognizing truth when I see it. The board was systematically misled. Information was filtered, manipulated, and sometimes completely fabricated before it reached us." "By Bryce Langford," I suggested. "By Bryce and a small cadre of executives who stood to make fortunes from the IPO," she confirmed. "But that doesn't absolve the board of responsibility. We should have asked more questions. We should have insisted on unfiltered access to division heads like you." She leaned forward, her expression intense. "Which brings me to why I asked you here. The board is meeting tonight in emergency session. We will be voting to terminate Bryce Langford and the entire executive committee. Effective immediately, we will be self-reporting to the SEC to supplement your whistleblower filing, and we will be announcing a comprehensive restructuring plan to salvage what can be saved of Barrington." I absorbed this information, considering its implications. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I want you to come back," she said simply. I stared at her. "Come back. I was escorted out like a criminal 2 days ago." "A grave error that will be publicly acknowledged and rectified," she assured me. "We need you, Danielle, not just for continuity or for your institutional knowledge, though both are valuable. We need you because you were right when everyone else was either wrong or silent. We need your moral compass." I shook my head slowly. "I appreciate the offer, Eleanor, but I've burned that bridge. My SEC filing." was the act of a loyal employee who exhausted all internal remedies before going external, she interrupted. It was the right thing to do, and the board will acknowledge that in our statement. She reached across the table, not quite touching my hand, but coming close, an unusual gesture of connection from someone of her generation and position. I'm offering you the chance to finish what you started, she said quietly, not as Chief Ethics Officer, but as Interim CEO. The words hung in the air between us, momentarily incomprehensible. I don't. You have the moral authority, the institutional knowledge, and the trust of the rank-and-file employees, Eleanor continued. The three things we need most right now. It would be temporary 6 to 9 months while we stabilize the company and search for permanent leadership. You would have complete autonomy to clean house and rebuild a culture of integrity. My mind raced with implications. The SEC would view this as a significant remedial measure, she finished for me. I've already had preliminary discussions with them. Your whistleblower status and rewards would be unaffected. And my pension. A smile flickered across her face. Immediately vested, with appropriate interest for the inconvenience of the 48-hour delay. I sat back, truly at a loss for words. Eleanor gave me a moment, then continued. I understand if you need time to consider. It's not a small thing I'm asking. No, I agreed. It's not. I took a deep breath. What happens if I decline? Then we respect your decision, announce a different interim leadership structure tomorrow, and proceed with the difficult work of rebuilding without your guidance. She shrugged slightly. It would be harder, but we would manage. I studied her carefully. You've thought this through. I've had 48 sleepless hours to think of nothing else, she confirmed. Barriton employs over 3,000 people. Danielle, most of them had nothing to do with Bryce's schemes. They're innocent bystanders whose livelihoods are now at risk because of actions taken by a few. It was a powerful appeal to my sense of responsibility, and Eleanor knew it. I had always cared deeply about the company's employees, had fought for their interests, even when it made me unpopular with leadership. I need until morning, I said finally. This isn't a decision I can make on impulse. Eleanor nodded, seemingly satisfied. The board meets at 8:00 p.m. I'll need your answer by 7:00. You'll have it, I promised. As we rose to leave, Eleanor fixed me with one last penetrating look. Whatever you decide, know that you've already changed Barriton forever. The question now is whether you want to shape what it becomes next. I left the Artemis Club with my thoughts in turmoil. The idea of returning to Barriton, not just returning, but leading it, was simultaneously appealing and terrifying. I had spent 24 years enforcing rules created by others. Could I now create the rules myself? As I walked toward my car, my phone rang. It was Alina, my young analyst. Danielle. Her voice was hushed, urgent. Are you okay? Everyone's talking about what happened. I'm fine, Alina, I assured her. What's the mood inside? Chaos, she reported. Half the executive floor hasn't shown up today. HR is giving these scripted reassurances that no one believes, and the trading floor. She paused. It's like a funeral. And what about you? I asked, genuinely concerned. Are you in any trouble for contacting me? No, she said. No one knows. I'm being careful. But, she hesitated, I'm not the only one who supports what you did. There's a whole group of us. We've been meeting in the East Stairwell because we think it's the only place without surveillance. I smiled despite myself. The East Stairwell has cameras too. Alina, upper corner, behind the fire extinguisher cabinet. Oh. Her dismay was palpable. Well, we've probably been recorded saying some pretty supportive things about you. Then, I appreciate that, I said sincerely. Listen, Alina, I may need information in the coming days. Things that aren't in my files. Can I count on you? Absolutely, she replied without hesitation. Whatever you need. After we hung up, I sat in my car, not yet starting the engine. Eleanor's offer replayed in my mind, as did Alina's implicit trust. I had spent my career believing in systems and institutions. I had believed that Barrington's ethical framework was solid. Even when individuals deviated from it, I had been proven catastrophically wrong. Could I now build a system I would actually believe in? My phone buzzed with a text from my attorney. "Call immediately. Settlement offer from Barrington." Instead of calling him, I scrolled through my contacts and dialed a number I rarely used. "Michael. It's Danielle Hart. I need your perspective on something." Michael Chen had been Barrington's general counsel for 15 years before retiring 3 years ago. He had been my ally in numerous ethical battles during our overlapping tenure. If anyone could give me unvarnished advice about Eleanor's offer, it was Michael. We agreed to meet at his house in 30 minutes. As I drove through Port Mercer's tree-lined residential districts, away from the glass towers of the financial center, I felt the weight of the decision before me. Return as CEO to rebuild what I had helped destroy, or walk away cleanly with my whistleblower reward and the satisfaction of having exposed the truth. Michael's colonial-style home sat on a quiet street of similar well-maintained properties. He greeted me at the door himself, still the picture of a corporate attorney in pressed slacks and a button-down shirt despite being retired. "Danielle," he said warmly, ushering me inside. "I've been following the news. Quite the earthquake you've triggered." "Not intentionally," I replied. "No." He raised an eyebrow as he led me to his study. "You submit a whistleblower filing 15 hours after being terminated, and you didn't expect seismic consequences." I conceded the point with a nod as I took a seat in one of his leather armchairs. "I expected consequences. I didn't expect to be offered the CEO position 48 hours later." Michael, who had been pouring us each a glass of scotch, nearly dropped the bottle. "You're serious?" "Completely. Eleanor Winters just made the offer. Interim CEO, 6 to 9 months, full autonomy to clean house and rebuild." He handed me a glass, then sank into the chair opposite mine, visibly processing this information. "Eleanor Winters," he mused. "I should have known she'd take decisive action. She doesn't suffer fools or frauds." "What do you think?" I asked. "Am I crazy to even consider it?" Michael took a thoughtful sip before answering. "It's not crazy, unexpected, certainly, complex, definitely, but not crazy." He studied me over his glass. "The question is whether you want to take on the burden of saving Barrington after they discarded you." "That's part of it," I acknowledged. "But there's more. 3,000 employees, thousands more clients whose financial futures are tied to Barrington's survival. If I walk away now with my whistleblower reward, am I just as guilty of abandoning them as Bryce was?" "No," Michael said firmly. "You exposed wrongdoing at great personal risk. Your moral obligation is fulfilled. Anything more is above and beyond." "But if I could do more—" I let the thought hang unfinished. Michael leaned forward. "Danielle, I've known you for 20 years. You've always been guided by what's right, not what's easy. So let me ask you this. Where do you think you can do the most good?" I considered his question seriously. If I take the position, I could ensure real change happens, not just cosmetic reforms to satisfy regulators. I could build the ethical culture I've always advocated for. And if you decline, then I testify. Consult with regulators. Perhaps work with other companies to prevent similar situations. More systemic impact, potentially, but less direct control over outcomes. Michael nodded. "Both paths have merit. Both allow you to do good. So perhaps the question isn't about obligation, but about personal fulfillment. Which path will let you sleep better at night 10 years from now?" The answer came to me with surprising clarity. "I need to see this through," I said slowly. "I need to finish what I started, not just exposing the problems, but fixing them." "Then you have your answer," Michael replied simply. "But am I being naive?" I pressed. "The board approved everything Bryce did, explicitly or implicitly. Can I really trust them now?" "You can trust Eleanor Winters," Michael said confidently, "and with her as board chair, you'll have the runway you need to implement real change." He paused. "But get everything in writing, every promise, every power, every protection. The Barrington that exists today is not the Barrington you joined 24 years ago. I nodded, finishing my scotch. Thank you, Michael. Don't thank me yet, he warned. If you take this job, you're walking into the fire. The next 6 months will be the hardest of your career. I know, I said, but maybe that's where I belong right now. As I drove back toward the city center, I called Eleanor Winters. It was 6:45 p.m., 15 minutes before her deadline. Eleanor, it's Danielle Hart. I've made my decision. I'm listening, she replied, her tone revealing nothing. I'll accept the interim CEO position under specific conditions. Name them. Complete autonomy over personnel decisions, a seat on the board for the duration of my tenure, public acknowledgement of wrongdoing and my whistleblower status, and full vesting of my pension, effective immediately, held in an irrevocable trust regardless of what happens next. There was a brief silence, then, accepted on all counts. Can you be at the board meeting tonight? I'll be there, I confirmed. Good. Use the executive entrance. Security will be expecting you. She paused. Thank you. Danielle, this is the right decision. We'll see, I replied, not quite ready to share her certainty. The call ended, and I felt a strange calm settle over me. 24 hours ago, I had been in my kitchen watching Barryton implode from the outside. Now I was heading back into the heart of the institution to rebuild it from within. The symmetry wasn't lost on me. I had left the building in disgrace at 6:00 p.m. 2 days ago. Now I would re-enter it at 8:00 p.m. with more power than I had ever wielded before. As I approached the familiar silhouette of Barryton Tower against the evening sky, I thought about the notebook I had carried for 24 years, the one filled with ethical guidelines and principles I had fought to uphold. I had written on its first page, on my first day at Barryton, integrity is doing the right thing even when no one is watching. Now everyone would be watching, and I would still do the right thing. The Barryton boardroom occupied the entire northeast corner of the 44th floor, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering commanding views of Port Mercer's skyline and the harbor beyond. I had presented in this room dozens of times over the years, but always as a visitor, never as a member. Now, as I took my seat at the massive mahogany table, I was acutely aware of the shift in power dynamics. The 12 board members regarded me with expressions ranging from cautious respect to barely concealed hostility. Eleanor Winters called the meeting to order precisely at 8:00 p.m. Before we begin, I want to acknowledge the extraordinary circumstances that bring us together tonight, she began, and to formally welcome Danielle Hart, who has agreed to serve as interim CEO, effective immediately upon the board's vote. A murmur ran through the room. Clearly, not all board members had been briefed on this development. Is this a joke? The question came from Victor Hargrove, a venture capitalist who had been Bryce's most vocal supporter on the board. You want to put the whistleblower in charge, the woman who just cost this company billions in market value. Bryce Langford's actions cost this company billions, Eleanor corrected firmly. Ms. Hart exposed those actions after exhausting all internal remedies. The fact that we're even able to take corrective action now instead of learning about these issues from indictments is because of her. She violated her confidentiality obligations, Hargrove persisted. Whistleblower protections supersede confidentiality agreements when reporting securities violations, I pointed out calmly. As a board member overseeing a publicly traded entity, you should know that. Hargrove's face flushed, but before he could respond, Eleanor redirected the conversation. We have 3 items on the agenda tonight, she announced. First, voting on the immediate termination of CEO Bryce Langford and CFO Martin Wells for cause. Second, voting on the appointment of Danielle Hart as interim CEO. Third, approving the public statement and SEC disclosure we will issue tomorrow morning. She turned to the board's secretary. Let's proceed with the first vote. The vote to terminate Bryce and Martin passed 10-2, with only Hargrove and one other board member dissenting. The vote on my appointment was closer 7-5 in favor, but still a clear majority. As the board secretary recorded the results, Eleanor turned to me. Congratulations, Ms. Hart. You are now the CEO of Baraton Strategic Holdings. The words felt surreal, but I acknowledged them with a nod. Thank you for your trust. I won't waste time with speeches now we have urgent work to do, but I want to be clear about my priorities: transparency with regulators, accountability for wrongdoing, and protection of employees and clients who depended on Baraton's integrity. We spent the next 2 hours reviewing the draft public statement and SEC disclosure, making revisions to ensure they were both forthright about past failures and clear about remedial steps. By 10:30 p.m., we had approved final versions of both documents to be released at 8:00 a.m. the next morning. As the meeting adjourned, Eleanor asked me to stay behind. When the room had cleared, she handed me a small object, a security badge. Your new access card, she explained. It opens everything executive elevator, secure files, all systems. I took it, remembering the beep of denial from my old card just 2 days ago. That was fast. We've been preparing for various scenarios since your whistleblower filing became public, she admitted. This was the best-case scenario. Best case? I raised an eyebrow. The company has lost billions in value, faces multiple investigations, and will likely pay substantial penalties. Yes, Eleanor agreed solemnly, but it survives, and it has a chance to become something better than it was. She gathered her papers. Your office is ready whenever you want to see it. Tonight, I decided, I want to review everything before tomorrow's announcement. She nodded approvingly. I thought you might. The executive floor is empty. Bryce and his team have been barred from the premises since this afternoon. Security will show you to the CEO's office. The executive elevator ride to the 45th floor was brief and laden with meaning. The last time I had been on this floor was for that fateful meeting 6 months ago, when I had overheard Bryce discussing my disappearance. The security officer escorted me to the CEO's suite, a spacious corner office with an adjoining conference room and private bathroom. Bryce's personal items had already been removed, leaving the space impersonal and oddly sterile. Thank you, I told the officer. I'll be fine from here. Once alone, I walked slowly around the office, absorbing the reality of my new position. The desk, twice the size of my old one, faced the windows rather than the door, symbolizing the CEO's outward focus on the world beyond Baraton rather than the internal workings of the company. I turned it around. My focus would be inward first, on healing the culture and restoring integrity to our operations. I sat down and logged into the computer system with my new credentials. For the first time, I had unfettered access to everything: board communications, executive deliberations, financial systems, personnel files. The transparency I had advocated for years was now at my fingertips. I began with Bryce's emails, searching for communications about my termination. It didn't take long to find the smoking gun, an exchange between Bryce and the head of HR from 2 weeks earlier. From Bryce Langford to Diana Mercer. Subject: Hart termination. Diana, we need to proceed with the Hart termination as discussed. Critical timing issue must happen exactly 15 hours before her pension vests. Schedule for 6:00 p.m. on the 14th. No earlier, no later. Standard protocol, otherwise immediate escort from building. Systems access terminated simultaneously. Prepare the separation agreement with the NDA as we discussed. No exceptions. B. From Diana Mercer to Bryce Langford. Subject: Re Hart. Termination. Bryce, I must again express my concerns about this approach. Ms. Hart has been with the company for 24 years with an exemplary record. The timing you're requesting could create significant legal exposure for Baraton, especially given her role in compliance. HR strongly recommends either 1. Allowing her pension to vest before termination. 15 hours is not worth the risk. 2. Documenting a clearer performance-based justification over a longer period. Please advise if you want to proceed despite these risks. Diana. From Bryce Langford to Diana Mercer. Subject: Re Hart termination. Proceed as directed. This is not a request. B. I sat back, a cold anger washing over me. The calculated cruelty of it, not just the termination itself, but the precise timing to deny me my earned pension, was breathtaking. and Diana Mercer had raised concerns but ultimately complied. I made a note Diana would be one of my first meetings tomorrow. I continued my exploration, pulling financial reports, reviewing pending transactions, and examining the IPO preparation documents. The picture that emerged confirmed everything I had suspected and more. The company's financial reporting had been systematically manipulated to present an artificially rosy picture to potential investors. Around 1:00 a.m., I heard a soft knock at the office door, surprised that anyone else would be here at this hour. I called, "Come in." The door opened to reveal Alina, looking nervous but determined. "Alina," I said, genuinely surprised. "What are you doing here so late?" "I heard," she said simply, "about your appointment. Word travels fast. Even at midnight." She hesitated in the doorway. "I wanted to see if you needed anything, and to give you this." She approached the desk and handed me a flash drive. "What is this?" I asked. "After you were terminated, a team was assigned to review all your files and communications," she explained. "I was part of that team. We were told to flag anything that could be used to discredit you if you went public with concerns." She gestured to the drive. "This is everything they collected, plus notes from their meetings about how to spin various discoveries." I stared at her, impressed by her courage and foresight. "You copied this knowing it might cost you your job." She nodded. "You taught me that some things matter more than job security." I pocketed the drive. "Thank you. Alina, this could be invaluable." I studied her thoughtfully. "How would you feel about a promotion?" Her eyes widened. "What kind of promotion?" "I need a chief of staff," I told her. "Someone I trust implicitly, who knows the organization but isn't compromised by too many existing loyalties. Someone with both technical skills and ethical backbone." "Me?" She sounded incredulous. "But I've only been here 3 years." "Sometimes fresh eyes are exactly what's needed," I replied. "Think about it overnight. We can discuss details tomorrow." After Alina left, I continued working until nearly 3:00 a.m., compiling a list of immediate priorities and identifying key personnel decisions. Finally, exhausted and satisfied with my preparation, I decided to go home for a few hours of sleep before returning for what promised to be one of the most challenging days of my professional life. As I left the building, the night security guard, not Marcus, but an older man I recognized from weekend shifts, did a double take when he saw me. "Ms. Hart, I heard you were... Well, welcome back, ma'am." "Thank you, George," I replied, pleased that I remembered his name. "Things have changed rather dramatically." He nodded sagely. "So I gather. Whole building's been buzzing. People are saying you're the new boss." "Interim CEO," I confirmed. He broke into a wide smile. "Well, that's the best news I've heard all week, begging your pardon, ma'am. But that Langford fellow never bothered to learn any of our names, not once in 18 months. I hadn't known that about Bryce, but it didn't surprise me. "Well, George, you'll be seeing a lot of me in the coming months, including some very early mornings and late nights." "We've got your back, Ms. Hart," he assured me. "The whole security team. Word gets around about who treats people right." His simple vote of confidence stayed with me during the short drive home. Perhaps this impossible task wasn't quite so impossible after all. There were good people throughout Barretton, people who had been silenced or sidelined under Bryce's leadership, but who remained committed to the company's true values. My phone pinged with an email as I parked outside my house. It was from Eleanor Winters, sent just minutes ago despite the late hour. "Danielle, the statement and SEC filing are ready for your final review before the 8 a.m. release. I've also taken the liberty of drafting an internal announcement to all employees about your appointment, to be distributed simultaneously. On a personal note, you've taken on an enormous challenge at significant personal cost. I want you to know that you have my complete support and confidence. Barretton can be saved, and you are the right person to save it, Eleanor." I replied with a brief confirmation that I would review everything by 7:00 a.m., then entered my dark, quiet house. For the first time in 2 days, I felt something like peace, not because the path ahead would be easy, it would be anything but because it was the right path. I had spent 24 years at Baraton, fighting for ethical practices from a position of limited power. Now I had the authority to implement the changes I had always advocated. The company that had tried to discard me would now be reshaped in my image. As I drifted off to sleep, I thought again of my notebook with its 24 years of observations and principles. Tomorrow, those principles would begin to become reality. I arrived at Baraton Tower at 6:30 a.m., beating even the earliest regular employees. The building was quiet, the massive lobby empty except for security personnel. I used my new access card to reach the executive floor, still marveling at the reversal of fortune that had occurred in just 72 hours. By 7:45 a.m., I had reviewed and approved the public statement, SEC filing, and internal announcement. I had also drafted a list of immediate priorities and scheduled meetings with key department heads throughout the day. At 8:00 a.m. precisely, everything was released simultaneously. The press statement announcing Bryce's termination and my appointment, the SEC filing detailing the financial irregularities we had discovered, and the email to all employees explaining the leadership change. I watched from the CEO's office as the news hit the financial media. The initial reaction was stunned disbelief, followed quickly by speculation about what this meant for Baraton's future. The stock, which had been in freefall since my whistleblower filing became public, stabilized somewhat on the news of decisive board action. By 8:30 a.m., my phone was ringing constantly with calls from journalists, analysts, and industry contacts. I let them all go to voicemail. Today was about internal communication, reassuring employees, and setting a new direction. The external world could wait. At 9:00 a.m., I held my first executive meeting. Only half of Bryce's leadership team remained. The others had been terminated along with him. The survivors looked shell-shocked, uncertain of their futures and my intentions. "Good morning," I began, taking my place at the head of the conference table. "We all know why we're here. Baraton is in crisis, a crisis of ethics, leadership, and trust. My job is to guide us through this crisis and rebuild what has been damaged. Your job is to decide whether you want to be part of that rebuilding." I looked each of them in the eye before continuing. "I have no interest in a witch hunt. What I care about is moving forward with absolute integrity. If you can commit to that, regardless of what happened in the past, there's a place for you here. If you can't, now is the time to say so." One executive, the head of international operations, spoke up. "With respect, Ms. Hart, some of us tried to raise concerns under the previous leadership. We were shut down or sidelined." "I know, Richard," I acknowledged. "I've reviewed the records. Your objections to the Singapore restructuring are well documented, as is the subsequent reduction in your authority. That's why you're still here." He looked surprised that I knew this history, then nodded gratefully. I turned to Diana Mercer, the HR director who had ultimately carried out my termination despite her reservations. "Diana, I saw your emails to Bryce about my termination. You raised concerns but proceeded anyway." She paled slightly. "Yes, I should have done more. Resigned in protest. Perhaps, I agreed. But you did create a record of your objections, which is more than most did. I need to know, can I trust you to stand firm next time?" She straightened in her chair. "Absolutely. I've learned my lesson the hardest way possible." I nodded, accepting her assurance for now but making a mental note to watch her actions closely. The meeting continued with a detailed discussion of immediate priorities, cooperating fully with the SEC investigation, conducting an internal audit of all financial reports from the past 2 years, and communicating transparently with employees about the changes ahead. By noon, the executive team had their marching orders, and I turned my attention to broader communication. I scheduled a company-wide town hall for 3:00 p.m., enough time for the news to percolate through the organization, but not so long that rumors and speculation would flourish unchecked. At 2:30 p.m., Alina knocked on my office door. "I've thought about your offer," she said without preamble. "And," I prompted. I accept, she replied firmly, on one condition. I raised an eyebrow, intrigued, which is that when you identify who actively participated in the fraud, they face consequences regardless of their level or connections. I smiled, pleased by her principled stance. That was already my intention. Alina, welcome aboard. Her first assignment as my chief of staff was to help prepare for the town hall. We decided on a format that would allow for maximum transparency, a brief prepared statement followed by unscripted Q&A. No questions would be off limits. At 3:00 p.m., I walked onto the stage in Baraton's main auditorium. Nearly 1,000 employees were present in person, with the rest watching via video link from regional offices. The room was silent as I approached the podium, all eyes fixed on the woman who had been escorted from the building in disgrace 72 hours earlier and had returned as CEO. Good afternoon, I began. As you all know by now, Baraton is facing an unprecedented situation. 3 days ago, I was terminated from my position as Chief Ethics and Compliance Officer, 15 hours before my pension was set to vest after 24 years of service. I paused, letting that sink in. I subsequently filed a whistleblower report with the SEC, detailing financial irregularities and ethical breaches I had documented over the past 2 years. Yesterday, the board of directors terminated CEO Bryce Langford and CFO Martin Wells for cause, and appointed me as interim CEO to lead Baraton through this crisis. The auditorium remained eerily quiet. I won't pretend this transition will be easy, I continued. We face regulatory investigations, potential fines, litigation from shareholders, and a crisis of confidence among our clients. But Baraton is more than the actions of a few individuals who violated our core values. Baraton is 3,000 dedicated professionals who come to work every day committed to serving our clients with integrity. I stepped away from the podium, preferring to speak directly rather than from behind a barrier. I've been where you are now, shocked, confused, worried about the future, questioning whether you can trust leadership. I understand those feelings because I've experienced them myself. So let me tell you exactly what you can expect from me as your CEO. I ticked off points on my fingers. 1. Absolute transparency. You will know what I know about our situation, to the maximum extent legally possible. 2. Accountability. Those who actively participated in wrongdoing will face appropriate consequences, regardless of their position. 3. Protection. Those who raised concerns or tried to do the right thing will be recognized and valued, not punished. 4. Renewal. We will use this crisis as an opportunity to rebuild Baraton on a foundation of genuine integrity, not just compliance with regulations, but commitment to ethical principles. I surveyed the room, making eye contact with as many employees as possible. Now, I'm ready to take your questions. Nothing is off limits. For a moment, there was silence. Then hands began to rise throughout the auditorium. The first question came from a young man in the investment division. What happens to our jobs? Are layoffs coming? A fair and expected concern. My goal is to preserve as many positions as possible. I answered honestly. But I won't mislead you, this situation will have financial consequences for Baraton, and some restructuring may be necessary. What I can promise is that any such decisions will be made transparently, based on business necessity rather than panic, and with appropriate support for affected employees. The questions continued for over an hour about the SEC investigation, potential penalties, client reactions, compensation impacts, and specific individuals who had been terminated. I answered each one as directly as possible, acknowledging when I didn't yet have complete information, but never evading or sugarcoating the challenges ahead. Finally, a senior analyst who had been with Baraton almost as long as I had stood up. Danielle, he said, dispensing with formalities. Many of us have worked here for decades. We believed in this company. We thought we were part of something ethical. How did we miss what was happening? And how can we ever trust again? His question cut to the heart of the matter, the sense of betrayal that permeated the organization. James, I acknowledged him by name. That's the question I've been asking myself for 2 years. The answer isn't simple. What happened at Barriton wasn't a sudden ethical collapse, it was a gradual erosion. Small compromises that became larger ones, information silos that prevented anyone from seeing the complete picture, a culture of deference to authority that discouraged questioning. I looked around the room again, taking in the sea of faces. As for trust, it can't be demanded, only earned. I don't expect you to trust leadership immediately after what's happened, but I do ask you to watch what we do, not just what we say. Judge us by our actions in the days and weeks ahead, and hold us accountable if we fall short of the standards we claim to uphold. The town hall concluded shortly after, and I spent the next few hours meeting with key client representatives who had demanded immediate reassurances. By 7 p.m., I was back in the CEO's office, reviewing the day's developments with Alina. "The initial shock is wearing off," she reported. "People are cautiously optimistic. The transparency of the town hall made a big impression." "Good," I said, "but this is just day one. We have months of difficult work ahead." My phone rang, Eleanor Winters calling for an update. "The stock closed down only 3%, she informed me without preamble. "After yesterday's 22% drop, that's practically a victory." "How are the institutional investors responding?" I asked. "Mixed," she admitted. 2 have indicated they're reducing their positions. 3 are holding steady for now. 1 Blackwell Capital actually increased their stake today." "Interesting," I mused. "They're betting on our recovery." "They're betting on you," Eleanor corrected. "Their analyst called me this afternoon. They believe your appointment signals a genuine commitment to reform, not just a public relations move." After we hung up, I sat quietly, contemplating the weight of responsibility I had taken on. 3,000 employees, countless clients, a financial institution with tentacles throughout the global economy. Could I really transform Barriton? Or was I merely managing its decline with more dignity than Bryce would have? A soft knock interrupted my thoughts. It was George, the night security guard. "Pardon the interruption, Ms. Hart. Just checking if you need anything before I start my rounds." "I'm fine, George, thank you." He lingered in the doorway. "If you don't mind my saying so, there's a different feel in the building today. People talking in the halls instead of hurrying with their heads down. More lights on after hours, like folks aren't in such a rush to leave." His observation touched me. "That's good to hear." "It is," he agreed. "This place was sick. Now maybe it's starting to heal." After he left, I opened my desk drawer and placed my old notebook inside 24 years of observations, concerns, and ethical guidelines that had once seemed like voices in the wilderness. Now they would become the foundation for Barriton's renewal. My phone pinged with a final email for the day from the SEC investigators requesting a follow-up interview. The road ahead would be long and difficult, with no guarantee of success, but for the first time in years, I felt aligned with my purpose. They had fired me 15 hours before my pension vested, thinking it was the end of my story at Barriton. Instead, it had merely been the end of one chapter and the beginning of another one they couldn't control. As I gathered my things to finally go home, I paused at the window overlooking Port Mercer's glittering skyline. Somewhere in that sea of lights were the homes of Barriton employees who had gone to bed uncertain about their futures. I had the power to shape those futures now. It was a responsibility I hadn't sought but would not shirk. The company that had tried to erase me would now be rebuilt through my vision of what a financial institution could and should be. They had thought firing me was the end. They were wrong. It was just the beginning.